this is one topic here that probably some of you might be interested in. I don't know, most probably don't have flies on your animals.
No,
You know.
no flies.
So, all right, so Russ is going to talk about the parasite fly control. And Russ, it's all yours.
Thanks, Mike. Before I get started, I want to let everybody know that there's a free copy of the Stockman Grass Farmer out at the Timeless Fence or out at the registration table for everybody. So stop and get your free copy of Stockman Grass Farmer if you're not subscribed to them. Alan, Jim, and myself all write for Stockman Grass Farmer. So there's 4 things that I look for in parasite and fly control on the farm. And whenever we were started going to the high stock density grazing, and we took all the Band-Aids, took the fly tags out, took the porons out, all the wormers out of the system, we literally had millions of flies, millions. You could walk into the cows, they climb up your nose, in your ears, they're in your mouth, it was terrible. So I did use some natural ways of trying to suppress them, but they were merely nothing more than Band-Aids until I could get things going on the farm and getting things going. So nutrient recycling, it's very, very important. And what we've learned today is, and yesterday, a lot of it comes down to biodiversity on the farm. But nutrient cycling is, anytime you ever talk to me, it's soil nutrient cycling. We want to break that manure down as quickly as possible whenever it comes out of our livestock to help break those fly cycles. These here are some of the dung beetles on my farm. I do not have the rollers or the tunnelers. There's 3 different types. These here are the dwellers. I don't have the rollers or the tunnelers on the farm, and they help in good healthy soil. You go back as you get the biodiversity in the soil, 7 days most generally that manure is gone, and we're breaking a lot of fly cycles, and we're reducing the fly loads on the livestock or the cows, and we're helping with the parasites. Does anybody see these on their cow pies? Sheep. These here are golden dung flies. They're actually a very beneficial insect for the manure. Manure is kind of like a double-edged sword for us. It's good fertilizer. It's great fertilizer, but it also can cause us parasite and fly problems. And these guys here, actually, they lay eggs, and their larvae seek out and eat other larvae, so it helps reduce those numbers. But there's a lot of insects that are in dung and manure. I've heard reports up to 175 different insects, but quite frankly, there's got to be more than that in different areas. You can see here we got a fly sitting on there getting ready to lay its eggs, and then we have a dung beetle. But this cow pat's only 2.5 hours old. We already have the fly activity on it. It used to be on the farm whenever we were using the porons and all that other stuff. These things here become petrified on the farm. In your dung beetles, they play a small role on your farm. The major thing that the dung beetle does for your cow pies is it breaks the crust. As that cow patty dries, you can see crusting. You can see some crusting out there today on those cow patties, but it breaks the crust so the other insects like the golden dung fly can actually lay its eggs, because after that crust is formed, it can't break through that crust. Here's one that's 3 hours old. It's just all kinds of insect activity in it. And this here's a cow patty that's 6 days old. Basically, a lot of the nutrients are already broke up, and it's just crumbly, and it almost looks like compost. but all the nutrients have actually been sucked out of there. That's kind of dry to touch, so we've broke the fly cycle, and we're working at breaking that parasite cycle, because once those eggs hatch, they have to climb the grass, and if it dries on them, if it gets hot and dry, it will actually kill those parasites. So in the high stock density, we've talked a lot about high stock density grazing. We have smaller system disturbance, faster nutrient cycling. Nutrient cycling is key. I mean, we really need to focus on nutrient cycling whenever we're looking at the adaptive or regenerative part of the equation in the type of grazing that we're doing. Increased forage yields, of course, less time taking care of the livestock, and of course the livestock are healthier because we're getting rid of some of these flies and parasites. Parasites is our major problem. I've worked with a lot of sheep producers up in my area this year, and for some reason they like a 30-day rest. They're setting themselves up for disaster when it comes to parasites. 30-day rest is not enough. A lot of the sheep producers, they like that grass this high. They're afraid to go into stuff like this. You can go in stuff like this, put them in a high stock density graze, and roll it down just like you can a cow. And in my opinion, I can achieve just about, if not better, than a cow with the sheep. The cows do a great job, but the sheep, in my opinion, have more nutrients in their manure, in their urine, and I've seen amazing things happen grazing sheep. One of the experiments that we did on the farm, we put 800,000 pounds to the acre. We left the cows in there for 2 hours. We went and we bought 500 flags, and we started marking dung and urine pads. We ran out of flags marking those dung and urine pads. So that is, to me, one of the best distributions of manure. It was just everywhere. You couldn't make a step without stepping on manure or where a cow had peed. And of course, the nutrient cycling, I'm going to talk about some innovative things that can help you cycle those nutrients better. You can see on the picture on the left side, we don't have a lot of trees, a lot of windbreaks, and we're going to start putting natural windbreaks in on the farm, but we have portable windbreaks. We've got to be careful though, because our balance can be upset. If there's not enough food, the cows consumes too much. We have idle nutrients that are not returned to the soil. Those idle nutrients that aren't returned to the soil quick enough is where we get in trouble with the flies. Effective winter grazing, it can be done to aid nutrient cycling. Whenever we're out, and you don't normally have parasite or fly problems in the wintertime, but we want to have that manure distributed. That way, whenever things start warming up and our microbes get active, those manure pats can just go away quickly, and it reduces those fly loads earlier in the year. Face flies, one thing about face flies is they can fly 4 miles. So you could be doing everything right on your farm. I've heard a lot of folks, they're putting stuff in their minerals to actually kill all the microbes in their manure, and they're still having fly problems. Probably what is happening is the flies are coming in from a neighboring farm onto their cows. The affordable fencing. Now, I wouldn't use this for an exterior fencing, but fencing can be very expensive, and if you're just starting out, this isn't the prettiest fence in the world, but it gets the job done. The one on the right, that is sucker rods. We got sucker rods available in our area. We go buy them, or go get them. They're 26 feet. They'll normally give them to us. cut them into 4-foot lengths, drive them into the ground with a hammer. We can put, well, me and a buddy put 16,000 feet in an 8-hour day. That's pounding the posts, putting the wire, putting the fin tubes on, stringing the wire, and hanging it. 2 of us, 16,000 feet in an 8-hour period. Now this fence that's on the left-hand side, it's a 3-wire fence. I think, in my opinion, it'll actually hold sheep in better than my 6-wire high tensile fence. For whatever reason, I don't know, but it seems to work better than holding the sheep. And it costs a little bit more. It's 17 cents a foot. I can put 1,500 feet of that in about an hour and a half. And that's putting the end posts in, putting a brace on it. On the end post, I'm putting a guy wire down. I'm putting a earth anchor in, and then I'm connecting. I'm using a T-post on the ends of those, because what makes a good fence? Good ends and good corners. That's what makes a good fence. Here's the portable windbreaks, to aid in our nutrient cycling until we get the shade or the windbreaks in place. This is a way for you to keep your livestock out on where they need to be and not having to take them back into trees or into a barn, whatever. They're right out there in them paddocks. I move them twice a day. I just took onto them with my side-by-side. There's 5 of them that I use. I pull 2 across, pull the other, and it doesn't take 5 minutes to move those. And I'm keeping those nutrients right out there where they need to be. Oh. This is kind of what it looks like up close. It doesn't have to be that fancy. I mean, that's pretty fancy in my books. If you go get a whole bunch of free pallets someplace, they already have the porosity. You can't put them up solid. You can't put a solid wall up whenever you're doing this. If you do, the wind's going to blow them over. These ones here actually stood up into a tornado. I had a tornado come right past my house. It hit these guys. It actually picked the tail end of the tail end wagon up, slid it over about 20 feet, but it was still standing upright. The porosity on this is 33%. An 8-inch board with 4-inch gap. You can make that a little bit tighter, and it's really, really cool whenever you're out there. You have a 15, 20 mile an hour wind, and I've showed this on my videos. You can hear the wind noise in the camera as soon as you step in behind those. It's just like you stepped inside someplace. It really, really helps if you're in an area where you need to get windbreak on your livestock, but this is a great way to keep them out. There we go again. Here's the cows in the morning. Normally whenever I go out, they huddle in behind those windbreaks and ruminate during the night. I've had a lot of questions on this today and yesterday. This here is my portable solar pump that I use. I use a 1921 Myers piston pump. The reason I'm using a piston pump, it's one of the most efficient pumps that you can use, and I have a solar motor on top of it. It's 24 volt. I believe it's 3rd horse. You don't need a lot of horsepower to run this thing. It has you can see better over here. Right there, that's a pulsation dampener. Basically, it's just a small tank upside down to prevent the hammering, because you'll get hammering from the piston pump. And then over here, there is a 50-gallon pressure tank. It works just like a shallow well pump with a pressure tank on it, or any other water system for that matter. And then I have 4 deep cycle batteries on it. And we go to, it's powered by 620 watt solar panels. The reason I have so many solar panels, I typically wouldn't need this, but my water source that I'm drawing from is a creek that's 500 feet down into a woods, and that has too much fall for me to lift. I have to lift that water. The solar piston, or the piston pump, can only lift 24 feet. You can only physically lift 24 feet. So I have more than 24 feet of lift. So I have to set the piston pump down in the woods. You can see it setting down in the woods. Naturally, there's not enough sunlight to run your solar panels. So I have my solar panels set out into the field 200 feet. Now this here also doubles. We were in a mild drought up there, as I mentioned before. One of our springs, on the spring on my home farm, dried up. And the spring on my second farm is struggling. And this here's plan C. If that happens, I have an acre pond that I can actually, this here's portable. I can set it on the acre pond, push water into a hydrant, and I got water back out onto the farm wherever I want it. So it isn't that expensive. I paid 25 bucks for that piston pump. I did have to make new leathers for it. And the electric motor was like $169, and then the solar panels are getting to be relatively cheap. If you watch on eBay, you can pick some of them 120 waters up for like 30, 40 bucks a piece. They're not, you know, I don't have a lot. I like to reuse. My family calls me Bob the Builder sometimes because I reuse, resave, and recycle. It's a challenge using stuff that I have squirreled away that I had no idea what I was going to use it for whenever somebody gave it to me. You can give me something, I'm going to probably take it if it has any value at all. I've been asked about water. The gentleman's not here that asked about the water earlier. This is a system that I developed. I've been developing this here for probably 4 years now, maybe a little bit longer. It's a high flow brass valve, just a simple high flow brass valve. When I started purchasing these, they were 18 bucks a piece. I mean, it's probably one of the least expensive valves. But this here is a needle valve. This is a trick. This here has been tested at 24 below zero and not freeze up on a frost-free hydrant. This here needle valve, we crack that open and we let it run whenever we're below freezing. And the thermal heat that comes out of the soil actually keeps the tank from freezing up. You can see here all of our tanks, we have a cage on the valve. Somebody talked about putting a polywire across it. I just set my tanks just inside the polywire, but for some reason, I don't know what it is, calves like to stand in tanks. I don't know why. I don't have an answer for that, but calves like to stand in the water tank, at least my water tanks. It's nothing more than a 55-gallon drum. It's cut at 19 inches high. That's for cattle. If you want to use it for sheep, cut it off at 10 inches high. Put that valve in, put the cage. Now, I have a fancy band that goes around the top. It has 4 handles around it. You don't have to get that fancy. Just drill 2 holes, 2 1-inch holes, about 6 inches apart, cut a slot, and you got 2 handles to pick your tank up and go wherever you want. My daughter's been moving the water since she's been 6 years old. She just flips the tank and away we go off to the next paddock. And you can see here, -4. That's kind of sort of what that tank looks like at -4. And you can see here I have just a little piece of copper tubing on that needle valve that I open up, and it's pointing up towards the surface, which actually helps keep that open. It's open enough that whenever the cows start watering in the morning, they'll actually break the rest of that ice out of there. This here helps aid in nutrient recycling as well. We scatter our hay out. I use large square bales. I prefer large square bales. I hated them when I first started using them. I was strictly round bales. These here I can put more in a smaller area, and for me they're a lot easier to handle. But I take this out on my side-by-side. I don't start my tractor, and if I have to, I can self-load it. And most generally, I just use my skid loader unless it's really cold, and then I'll self-load it because I only want to start one diesel engine in really cold weather. And I have a gator. Some folks have asked me what I have. I have a gator. That thing has never not wanted to start for me at 14. The lowest I've had it is 14 below zero. Is not once not started for me. I get a kick out of folks, and I don't want to insult anybody. They get these heavy tires and they put their minerals in the heavy tires and they got to drag it around and it weighs 200 pounds. And right there, I made my water tank out of the other half of this mineral feeder. This here's my mineral feeder. Sometimes I just dump it out on the ground, depends on their mineral uptake. If I know exactly what they're requiring or what they're taking in a day's time, I just dump it out on the ground, especially if there's snow on the ground. They're very efficient about taking that up. At first I was worried about it burning the grass out. You can't even tell where those minerals were whenever I've dumped them out. This here's my basic mineral feeder. My daughter, she picks it up. Now, yeah, it's exposed to the elements. I get water in there, it makes salt brine. I may have to dump, if I get 4 inches of rain, I may have to dump a little bit of water off of it, but I try to keep as much water as I can. Take to the next paddock. The cows drink that salt brine down. I'm not wasting anything. And it doesn't get hard, doesn't get crusty. Breaking our cycles, that's one of our key things on our flies, and the nutrient cycling is one of the ways that we're most effective at breaking the cycles on the parasites and flies. Follow the leader, your grazing height. Jim had talked about that earlier, how important your grazing height is. Your worms can hatch in 3 to 4 days and start climbing up the grass. So if you're keeping your sheep or your cows in a paddock for a length of time, those worms can hatch, start climbing up the grass and reinfecting your livestock. So it will cause you problems if you graze it shorter than that. The multi-species, the idea originally, whenever I first started into this, there's guys that run their cows across and then they take their sheep. And the idea is the cows are eating the worms because some of the worms don't cross over into the species. And when I started doing research on this, there's hundreds of different kinds of worms. I mean, there's a lot. The worm eggs can survive for up to 120 days in cool, moist conditions. They used to say that if we got winter time, that would break the parasite cycle. I'm talking about parasites here. However, first thing in the spring, those eggs can be hanging out in your pastures, and they hatch. You turn your sheep or your cows out in springtime when the grass is too short. They're going to eat that grass, get the parasites, and have troubles. So they're recommending a 60 to a 65-day rest in the summertime. Most generally, 30 days is whenever the parasites are at the highest in that grass, and then they start declining. So you're not going to get the reinfection as much. On our farm, we have an average rest of 120 days. My sheep have not been on the same land as they started at the beginning of the year. As we move the sheep across the farm, they're always going on to fresh land that they have never been on. And by doing that, they're not exposing themselves to any new parasites. We haven't wormed our sheep in 3 years. We haven't wormed our cattle since 2012. And the reason we haven't wormed our sheep in 3 years is because we've only had them 3 years. We don't clip their feet. Encouraging predators onto the farm. If we plant pollinators, bird nests, if you're grazing out across the field and there's a bird nest, I'll just throw a temporary fence around it. And most generally, if you keep it 3 feet out around, that bird will continue to nest and lay her eggs in there, and she'll hatch and have her fledglings, and everything's good. My cows like to knock those birds' nests out for some reason, so just spend some time. It only takes 2 seconds. Four poly step-in posts and a poly wire, and then of course we're working on pollinators to bring those predators onto the farm. I've put tons and tons of different types of species of pollinators, and I'm working at incorporating them into the fields. This here is a cup plant stand. We actually harvested some of the seed off of that field this year, and we have wild bergamot, we have narrow leaf mountain mint, we have purple cone flowers, and most all these seeds are seeds that I've harvested along the road someplace, and I've propagated them, and I just scatter them across the farm. So we're bringing the habitat in. How about man-made housing? Is anybody putting bird boxes or birdhouses out for their birds? We have 200 of them on our farm. We had, as near as I can figure, we had 35 nesting pairs of eastern bluebirds, and we had around 30 to 35 nesting pairs of tree swallows. A pair of tree swallows will consume approximately 6,000 flies a day whenever they're feeding their fledglings. One thing that I would like to caution on this, these here are, most generally you find bluebird boxes, and whenever you're building them, you're building them out of 1x6s, and it makes a real, like a 4.5-inch floor in it. And the cavity's only 4.5 inches. I make mine out of 1x6s and 1x8s, which makes the floor spacing a 5.5 inches by 5.5 inches, which this gives a larger cavity for the tree swallows, because if you're having tree swallows, most generally they have 6 babies. Bluebirds usually have 3 to 4. And I've had, and I couldn't figure this out for the longest time. When I go out and clean my boxes out, I would have a whole fledgling nest that was dead in the boxes. I contacted my wildlife or my game commission biologist and had her come out, and she said, well, it's probably pesticides. Well, the next closest farm to my farm is 3/4 of a mile away, and I'm pretty sure that they're not going 3/4 of a mile over the trees. And the only thing, and she had, that's the only thing she said, it was pesticides. I don't use pesticides on the farm. So upon research, having that smaller cavity, they can get too hot and it can kill the fledglings. So if you're building or buying birdhouses, try and get the ones with the bigger floor space. Here's a tree swallow trying out one of our new boxes that we had put out. Barn swallows, anybody have barn swallows? A lot of folks like to knock those off their lights and out of their barns and stuff. We'll actually crack our barn doors and encourage them and let them come in. We had 6 or 7 nesting pairs of barn swallows this year. They're pretty effective. How about purple martins? Any purple martins? A lot of folks think purple martins eat mosquitoes, but they actually do not eat mosquitoes. They actually fly higher than what the mosquito normally goes. They actually, if you watch the purple martins, they fly at about 100 feet, and the mosquitoes normally don't get into the air that high, so they're eating insects. Now you're going to say, well, for us, you got all these bird boxes. How about your bees? We haven't had any problems with them wiping our bees out. I'm sure they've gotten some of the bees, but for the most part, our bees have actually really thrived this year because of the biodiversity on the farm. Bats. Bats are kind of missed. Anybody with bat houses? You give up? you got them all? Bat houses, a colony of bats can eat 30,000 insects in a night. The big brown bat, they were kind of almost, the numbers was really decimated because of the snotty nose syndrome they had. But we've been able to actually bring them back. I haven't been able to count them, but I have these bat houses out all over the place. I think there's 6 of them on my farm. And that bat house there, I'm told, you should be able to have 130 big brown bats in there. And the big brown bats are actually helping with the mosquitoes, which the mosquitoes cause a lot of problems, a lot more problems than what we think. Anaplasmosis, anybody heard of anaplasmosis? It's a parasite that attacks the red blood cells. It actually lowers the red blood cells. I had a dog that got it one time, and the cattle can get it as well. Cattle can get the anaplasmosis. Chimney swifts, that's another new species on the farm. The purple martins and the chimney swifts are new species that we have on the farm. You can see that chimney there. We stopped using that chimney usually around the 1st of April when we let the chimney swifts build nests in it. We had 4 nesting pairs of chimney swifts last year. They're a pretty cool bird if you've ever seen them. They're always flying. They're noisy. They're a noisy bird. How about amphibians? We have 4 different species of salamanders that I know of living on the farm. We have the redback, we have the spotted newt, the spotted salamander, and the mud puppy. And we're seeing a lot of, it's probably hard for you to see, because this guy's got the ultimate camouflage. I've never seen an animal in the animal kingdom that is more camouflaged than the tree frog. You can't hardly see that guy. You can only see his eye. We started seeing these things. I've probably seen 50 of them this year. And it's the first year I've ever seen a tree frog on the farm. I had a herpetologist, I believe that's what they're called, somebody that studies salamanders. He came to the farm. He wanted to do a study. He wanted to see how many salamanders was on the farm. Okay, he wanted to do it in the grazing pastures. He picked 3 farms, and this was a grad study that he was doing. And he was going to prove that grazing decimated the salamander populations. Well, he picked 2 farms. One was a continuously grazed farm. One was on like a 7 to 14-day rotation, and then he picked my farm. And he actually come up with the fact that there was more snakes and more salamanders on our farm than what he could find out in his control area that he had, where there was no grazing or anything like that. It was pretty neat to have these salamanders, because to me, the salamander is kind of like the canary in the cage. How about fly-resistant genetics? This is key. The South Poles are known for their fly resistance. The inheritability is up to 58%, and whenever you're selecting breeding stock or selecting heifers for back into your herd, you should be selecting for parasite or fly resistance. Fly resistance is something that's very easy to breed into your herd. Brahmin, they're more resistant to horn flies and parasites than the continental breeds. It's because they come from an area where there's a lot of bugs that can kill them very easily. They have a higher number of hairs per inch on their hide, and we're going to get into that, why the more hairs per inch on the hide actually makes a difference. And you can identify some of the, it doesn't matter what breed you have, there's individuals within your breed that are more fly resistant than others. And you can see here, look at these cows here, they don't have a single fly on them, and then we have this cow back here that has flies on her. They're the same breed, same pretty much genetics, but the only difference is she's a higher or a larger framed animal. Smaller framed animals have fewer flies than larger framed animals, because within the breed, they're pretty much, whether they're a small framed or a large framed animal within the breed, they're pretty much born with the same amount of hairs on their body. And the reason the hairs are so important, they have this subcutaneous glands that secrete a substance that reflects sunlight. And I get the comment on my farm all the time, and I personally, I don't see it because I think that this is how the livestock are supposed to look. Oh, you know, look at her hide. Look how shiny she is. I always get the comment, man, your cows are so shiny. They weren't always like that. Back when we were in the conventional, they weren't always like that. That shininess helps reflect the heat off their bodies. But you can, if you have any cattle or horses, the same way, you go up and you scratch them, and you pull your hand off, and you have that layer of wax or oil on your hands that you have to rub off. That actually helps keep the flies off of them. It's a natural resistance to flies. And horned flies have an anticoagulant. Like most blood-sucking animals, they put the anticoagulant in. They inject it to keep the blood from clotting so they can suck it up. And beef cattle have thrombin that actually helps counteract the anticoagulant and actually plugs their sucker up. I don't know what the name of it is right offhand, but I can't remember it. But anyhow, it will help clog that their sucker up and keep them from sucking blood. Have you ever seen the bulls in your herd? They always usually have more flies on them. Testosterone actually attracts flies. 2 to 4 times more flies, and I've noticed this year in my herd. We have a group of bulls off to the side, and we had 2 or 3 bulls. They had all the flies on them, and the rest of them didn't. Summary is, not one thing is going to control all your parasites and flies. You have to manage. If I have a parasite outbreak, now I didn't take the wormers out of my toolbox. I still have them in my toolbox. I'll use them if I have to, but I haven't needed them. But not any one thing is going to control all your parasites or your flies, but all of them together can help. Whenever our birds left, all our birds packed up and moved south. They're probably down here someplace now, but they all packed up and moved south around August 1st. And we started seeing a really heavy fly load about the 3rd week in August. Because we were so dry, our microbes weren't as active as they normally are. As soon as we started getting a little bit of rain, those fly numbers are back down now to where I'll bet you we don't have 50 horn flies per animal on their backs now. It was really, really neat to see that, see how well that the birds, or how effective the birds were at controlling those flies. Questions? Yes, ma'am.
Oh, no, there.
You were saying that you moved your sheep and they didn't come back on the same ground or hadn't been. How big an area are you talking about?
The sheep have not grazed more than, I have 40 head of sheep, and we're growing that sheep flock out. My daughter tells me, my 11-year-old daughter tells me she wants 110 ewes, so that's what we're working, that's our target goal, is 110 ewes. Those sheep haven't covered 10 acres yet this year. We put them in pretty tall grass, and it's pretty thick grass.
Okay, but how big are your paddocks?
Oh, probably maybe from this wide to the door to the edge of here.
And you put them in there for how long?
Once a day we move the sheep. We keep them in with 2 strands of polywire.
I was just admiring your mineral feeder, and I was wondering if you had any issues with cattle walking on it.
Flipping it? No.
They don't walk into it?
Nope. Occasionally I'll have a bull that seems to want to dig and paw in it, but no, I have not had any issues with them flipping and doing funny things to the mineral feeder. Most generally my cows are out there foraging and doing what they need to do versus playing around in the mineral feeder.
Next question.
Go.
I noticed the spacing of your bluebird houses.
Yes.
Was that something you just decided on because of aesthetics, or is there a purpose that you've got on every other?
To be honest with you, aesthetics is the last thing that I worry about on my farm.
Okay.
It's what I can do to, or how can I make my farm more profitable and be more effective. I don't cut my grass. I haven't cut my lawn grass for 4 years. I haven't done it. People come in and they see that terrible tall grass, but you know what? Around my barnyard in my my lawn, I gain an extra 110 grazing days. You know, that's to me is money. I got a lawnmower. It's sitting up in the barn. It hasn't been started for a really long time. It's probably going to need work, but I don't have any intentions of using it. So aesthetics isn't a thing for me. I wanted as many bluebird houses and swallow houses as I could put on the farm. Now bluebirds, most generally, they're a little bit more territorial. Tree swallows will nest 35 feet apart, but bluebirds, it's recommended to keep your birdhouses 100 feet apart.
Okay, they look closer than that. That's why
They're
I
50
asked.
feet.
Okay.
They're approximately 50 feet is what those are. And as we progress, I may even next year start putting them on every post out across the field just to attract more birds. Yep.
Next question.
On your mineral feeder, if your minerals get wet, does that ruin them per se?
No. No, it doesn't ruin them. At first, I thought that maybe that it would make them hard to where they wouldn't be able to use them. And like I said, if we get that much water in them, I just pick it up. I'm very careful about it. I pick it up, set it in the back of the side-by-side, and we go to the next paddock. I set it out, and those cows drink that brine off, and they'll lick those minerals up. There's no issues whatsoever. And I know the reason you're asking, because a lot of the mineral feeders have that big heavy cover on it. Well, those big heavy covers, you got to think about this. Your calves can't get into your mineral feeders. And your calves my calves are at the mineral feeders at 3 weeks to a month old with their moms eating minerals.
Next.
Yes, ma'am.
How high off the ground are those birdhouses?
4 feet.
My cows would knock every one of those off.
They're strategically placed. They're placed right over top of the posts. My cows like to play with things as well. If you see, every one of them is like an extension to the post. They're right over top. If I were to face them any other direction on those posts, the cows rub on them, they'll knock them down, they do all kinds of things to them.
They wouldn't last on my farm. I mean, they knock everything off I put on them.
Like the bull in a China shop. Try putting them over top of your posts. You might be surprised.
Anyone else?
And another thing that I get asked a lot on these birdhouses, I get a lot of folks really get after me because they say, well, you don't have no guards on those posts. to keep the predators like snakes and raccoons and different things coming up those posts to harm those birds. You got to think about it for a second. There's 6,500 volts in every other line, and the other ones are dead grounded. I have so I have a positive and negative system, so if a snake gets in between those two wires, he's going to know it, and it's the same with a raccoon. I don't have to worry about my baby birds getting taken by raccoons or snakes. And we have tons of gardener snakes. I've seen hundreds of gardener snakes, 4 feet long and that big around on the farm this year. I wish we had black snakes. I've yet to see a black snake.
All right, anybody else? All right, good deal. Thank you, Russ.
Yeah. Thank you.